Great, and we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today I have something a little bit different. And today Sue Thomas from Bournemouth, England. I hope I pronounced that right. Bournemouth, England. And Sue, you're a writer on nature and technology and also a visiting fellow in the media school at Bournemouth University. I read on your LinkedIn profile. And we got connected because you wrote a book called Nature and Wellbeing in the Digital Age. And man, that caught my attention and I really enjoyed reading the book. So I'm super excited to be interviewing you today. And let's start with the first question and dive right in. And that is, what does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
Well, I'm very lucky in that just a few years ago, I moved very close to the beach. And I managed to get a flat where every single window has some view of the sea.
Wow.
So that is just such an amazing treat, really. So in terms of my virtual office, I live on the fourth floor of a block of flats, and I tend to move around the flat quite a lot. So depending on the time of day, or what's going on outside, I might sit in the kitchen or the lounge or my study, which has two different views of the sea. And I just kind of revel in it, really. There's a kind of theory of blue mind, which is that views of the sea are especially calming and stress reducing. So I'm very fortunate to have that. Sometimes, however, I find that I long for the green. And so sometimes I'll take books or my laptop or whatever and go into the nearby New Forest, which is I think it's 200 kilometers of forest.
Wow.
Not so far, just a drive away, 20-30 minute drive away. And so I'm quite selective about the places where I work. And a lot of them are based on the views or the kind of physical surroundings. And of course, I try and work on the beach when I can, but laptops and sandy things don't really go together.
Right. I see all those pictures all the time and I think, I don't know. I mean, the sand, the sun, it just doesn't seem like the right combination.
Well, that's it. But we have got a really nice beach cafe and we've got a pier where you can sit in the shade. So one of the things about working outside, I guess, is this problem of light. And with the laptop, often it's difficult to work outside because of the way the light reflects on the screen. So I'm hoping somebody's going to fix that sometime soon.
I keep hearing rumors of people making special kind of glass and monitors, but I don't know of any yet.
But I like the idea basically of an outdoor office. And I do know people who've deliberately set up an office in the garden, which is shaded by a tree or whatever, and they call it their outdoor office, which I think is a nice idea.
Indeed. Well, you've written a whole book about nature and well-being in the digital age. And I'm thinking we have the luxury. I also have a beautiful garden that I'm looking out at all day long. I mean, it's green and there's flowers and neighbor cats are running by. I totally love it. And there's many people who don't have the luxury of having that kind of environment. And I'm assuming that part of the book that you've written is for those people as a reminder that nature is important. Let's dive into the book. Tell us a little bit about the book and why you wrote it.
Well, I've been writing about computers and cyberspace for a long time. My first book was a novel called Correspondence, and that came out in 1992. And that was really about two different worlds. One world of technology, of a woman who kind of turns herself into a cyborg. And the other part of the novel was about a woman who longs to live in the countryside. So even that very first novel, without really understanding what I was doing, I was putting technology and nature together. And then in 2004, I wrote a book called Hello World, Travels in Virtuality. And that was a non-fiction book. It was a memoir about my life in cyberspace and about how I actually like to inhabit both worlds, and I often see parallels between them. So that was a very personal memoir. So that came out in 2004, and at the end of that, I thought, well, I wonder if I'm the only person who feels this connection. So I set out on what turned out to be a long research project which I can talk about later if you like. But that ended up in a book called Technobiophilia, Nature and Cyberspace. Now, that was a fairly detailed academic study. And at the end of that, which came out 2013, I thought, actually, I need to start thinking about making these ideas more accessible. And that's what brought about this newest book, which is a kind of much simplified explanation of why it's important to connect your natural life in nature with your wired life, but also has practical tips for how to do it.
Right. Right. It's true, because the theory is one thing and the practical tips are another. And a lot of people are not necessarily interested in the theory behind it, but they know intuitively that this work-life balance, I think you said it's not work-life balance anymore. It's tech-nature balance. I loved that. I love it. So people have intuitively know. And so I think a book like this is really appealing because it's a good reminder of, let's go back outside. And I liked all your actionable tips.
Thank you. Well, certainly whenever I give a talk about this, and in fact this week I've given 2 talks, so I've asked this question twice, is I always ask the audience, on your laptop or your phone or whatever, if you have a screensaver or screen wallpaper, does it have a picture of nature on it? And I always get maybe about 60% of the audience, maybe more, depending on the type of audience. People say, yes, they do. And if you like, my book is an explanation as to why you've done that, why you've chosen that.
Right. Indeed, my screensaver is the Hubble space pictures that were.
There you go.
So yeah, exactly. It's also nature. So there was something interesting that really struck me in your book, and you made a statement. I'm not going to paraphrase it correctly, but the statement was something like, you also get benefit if you're walking. You get the same kind of benefits if you're walking in a virtual forest as if you're walking in a real forest. And that really struck me, because I thought, if anybody that's experienced virtual worlds will understand what you mean by that, I'm sure. But for those of us who haven't experienced virtual worlds, what is the theory a little bit behind that? And what do you mean? It's fascinating.
Yeah, well, I'll say a little bit about the research because it kind of puts it in context. There is a lot of research by environmental psychologists who measure the way that we interact or connect with nature, and they can measure heart rate and pulse, and they do all kinds of cognitive tests to see whether you're able to do maths, for example, quicker or slower, depending on your exposure to an environment. So there's quite a battery of different tests that will produce evidence to show that, yes, if you're looking at a picture of greenery or a tree, that actually, yes, your heart rate will slow down.
Wow.
There's a lot of a body of work in this area. And in Japan, there's particularly a lot of work around what they call forest bathing or Shinrin-yoku, where people walk in a forest for hours and absorb the aromas of the trees and touch the bark and listen to the streams and the birds. And you can measurably show that it's had a restorative and stress-reducing benefit to them. So there's lots of research like that, some of which I've talked about in the book, but I talk about it in more detail in the Technobiophilia longer book. So it's just starting recently that people have started to try to replicate those experiments in virtuality. And most interestingly, when my last book came out, Technobiophilia, and I did various articles about it, I had a piece in Slate about virtual nature and how it affects you. And the makers of Farmville got in touch with me. And they said, this is really interesting because they do a lot of user testing, focus groups, this kind of thing. And they were very used to focus groups reporting that they played Farmville to calm down, to regain some energy, to reduce stress. Lots and lots of people reporting that. But they didn't know why until they read my article.
Oh, wow, because it wasn't the actual game of it that was calming the people down necessarily. I mean, maybe I'm sure some of them were calmed by just
Yeah.
playing a game. It was the nature aspect of being
Yes.
in Farmville.
Harvesting your virtual tomatoes or collecting your virtual eggs. And this was,
Wow.
and this was really, they were absolutely used to it, but they never really wondered why this was the case. So it completely fitted in with my theory of you know, how the connection between our love of nature and our love of technology can come together in a positive way. So you asked about the experiment in virtual reality. Just to explain, one of them, there was an experiment done about 10 years ago, I think, where students were taken out into a park in, I think it was Detroit, and they were measured before they went into the park, when they came out of the park, with their mathematical, cognitive abilities and so on. And they performed much better after being exposed to nature than they did when they repeated the same experiment in city streets.
Okay.
So the exposure to nature helped them cognitively and also helped them focus their attention, concentration. Now, some years later, a PhD student called Delcho Valchanov repeated this experiment almost identically, except he used 3 different virtual reality environments for his test subjects. One was Shibuya Junction in Tokyo. One was a completely geometric abstract environment, and the third was a virtual nature environment. And he found the same, that the people who'd gone into virtual nature had better test results than the other 2.
That is so interesting, because I would expect that there would be calming. I mean, it's not just then about being outside. It's about being outside in nature.
Yes.
So, but what happens? What about all those city people living in New York City?
Well, there's a whole area of design and architectural design called biophilic design. So biophilia is our love of nature, which some people say goes back to the very early days when we were having to survive and we were having to be very sensitized to the world around us for our own protection and survival and so on. And the biologist, E.O. Wilson, says that this is actually a genetic thing. It carries with us even today. Sometimes he says it might go dormant, but it can be woken up by all kinds of things. So this is what he says is in play when, for example, you're stopped in your tracks by the smell of a strawberry that you remember having when you were a child, that kind of thing. Or, simply just enjoying a beautiful day or being in a forest. Or we all have those moments when we suddenly feel really connected to the world. Now, he would call this biophilia. And biophilic design is about trying to bring that kind of sense back into the designed urban environment. So in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be speaking in Singapore. And I understand that this is the actual capital of biophilic design.
Wow.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing how they implement it. So I guess you might say that we take it for granted that our cities are grey and have no plant life and so on. But there are 2 points to that. One is, yes, they actually do if you look for it, even if it's just wild scrubland. But secondly, a lot of people are deliberately trying to put that back into cities with parks and gardens and house plants and all kinds of things.
True. I can imagine. Is there an amount of time that people need to be in nature in order to have effects? I mean, is it an hour or?
Well, that's an interesting question. In the forest bathing community in Japan, they do actually prescribe hours, a number of hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours, which is a long time.
It's a long time.
Sitting around in a forest.
I have work to do.
But, yeah. Well, technically, you can do the work while you're sitting in the forest. Find a comfortable log. But there's also this. Some people talk about researchers are looking at the answer to your question. They're looking for what is the best daily dose of nature. That's what they call it, the daily dose. And I think we can each find our own daily dose for that.
That's a very good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. So it's up to you and where you live. But I suppose if you make an effort every day to say, today I'm going to have my daily dose of nature, and I will do it by going to the park in my lunch break. If you're consciously kind of keeping track of that every day, I think that could be helpful. As to whether you stay in the park for 5 minutes or half an hour, it depends on you.
Right. And what you need. That's right. Everybody has a different level of social needs, for example.
Yes.
Some people can be alone for a lot longer than other people. And
Yeah,
indeed. So we have to design it for ourselves. So why is it so hard? Why are people not doing it? There must be tons of research on this.
well, I've got a bit of a hobby horse about this, because I think that we're kind of beaten around the head for our love of technology. And there's a whole movement trying to make us feel endlessly guilty for the fact that we love our phones and our laptops and tablets. We don't want to leave them at home. So that's why you get the idea of the digital detox, and people saying, you will be a better person. It will be better for you if you just leave your phone at home when you go out, and this kind of thing. And I think that we've almost come to believe that. It's as though we've lost confidence in ourselves. And the fact is that actually we can choose. I'm not intimidated and dominated by my phone. I choose when to use it, and I'm sure you're not either. But many people try and make us think we are. That we are
Right.
addicted, or that we can't cope. We can't put it down. Well, we can choose to. So we can choose when to turn off, and we can choose when to turn on. And if we choose to go for a walk and take our phone so we can take pictures and keep in touch with everybody else, there's nothing wrong with that. So I think if we can actually just remove the guilt, we'll feel much more relaxed and freed up to live a full digital life and connect to nature while we're doing it.
Right. Oh, I love it. I'll be guilt-free all day today.
Yeah, be guilt-free.
Well,
I've decided the way to say this simply is that, instead of people saying you need to cut down on your technology and so on, I'm tending to think now it's not that we need less technology, we just need more nature, and we can do that easily.
it's true. It's not that hard to just get outside and walk to your nearest park, which is usually everybody's got a nearest park.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or have things in your home that feel good, biophilic wood things, stone things. Make sure that you have plants around you, particularly around your desk and so on. NASA has a whole list of plants that are particularly good for your well-being, that will work well in kind of electrified, electronic kind of work environments. There are plants that will clean the air up for you. I've got, I think, a few of those in the book. So, yeah, it's not hard, but we feel a bit beaten down by all of the negativity around technology use.
So interesting. When I was first started my career, I worked in an engineering firm in one of those cubicle farm places, just cubicles as far as the eye could see. And I remember at the end of one project, I instinctively bought thank you gifts for everybody on my team, and I bought them plants. And I remember thinking like, oh, it's a good thank you gift, like it's affordable and it's beautiful, but it'll also make the office much more beautiful. And indeed,
Yes.
when you have 20 new plants in the office, it really made a difference.
I can imagine.
Been struck by that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that. But then, of course, if you can't look after plants for whatever reason, you can still have pictures. You can have these wall decals, the transfers that you can put on walls, or pictures or ornaments. If you're just a bit kind of mindful about it, there's a lot you can do, even if you can't look after real plants.
So I can imagine that walking through a digital forest has benefits, surprising benefits, but it can't be as good as actually walking in a real forest. Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't think so, particularly, in terms of the sensory experience. Obviously, there's no smell and touch and all that kind of thing. But I've got various pictures of me when I go to Second Life and go into Chaplain Forest, which is a really beautiful forest with a flowing river. And I will sometimes have that on in the background while I'm working, and get the sense that I'm there in the forest as well as actually in my office working. So I think it's partly to do with our imagination as to how much we bring to it, and how much we then are kind of reconnected with that sense of well-being from being in nature. I mean, there's some interesting research showing that this can be very powerful, and we have to be aware of that because it could be used in a negative way. There's a little bit of research showing, I don't think I had room for it in the book, but very briefly, there was an advertising campaign in Spain some years ago that was for an energy company. And they used beautiful natural views of soaring eagles and that kind of thing. And they discovered when they followed up on the campaign that these beautiful TV ads made everybody feel great. Even the people who were not happy about having electricity generating stations in their locality, they were kind of overcome by the beauty of connecting with nature in these videos. And the researchers who looked at it said, hang on, this is a bit worrying, because if virtual nature can have almost an equivalent positive benefit, we need to be careful how we use it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
oh, of course, the marketers jump right on it. And
exactly.
It's true.
Exactly. And if you start looking around to see how many industries that we consider are problematic, how many of them brand green, there are a lot. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. It's very attractive. So, what are some of your favorite tips from the book? Something that, going out for a walk, I think everybody probably, the first thing they would think of is going out for a walk. But what's something that people wouldn't think of right off the bat that might be easy to do? I don't know if that's
I quite like the idea of having wooden and stone things around that you can hold in your hand. And I did treat myself to a wooden mouse, because I know lots of people don't use the mouse anymore, but I love using a mouse. And so I've got one that's made of wood. So when it's in my hand, it's kind of warm and pleasant and feels quite different to a plastic mouse. That's one thing. I'm also very fond of having little aquariums on my phone. I've got a Galaxy S6, and so you can get live wallpaper with little goldfish swimming around, and as you touch them, they'll go and hide behind the weeds, or you can pretend to feed them, and with virtual fish food and that kind of thing. And it's that kind of sense of you're connecting with something that's kind of live, even though we know it's not. So I'm very fond of my fish wallpaper, and I like the idea of remembering that there's a body beyond this brain that's connecting with cyberspace all the time, and then I can reconnect through natural materials.
I really like that. And it seems very simple to do. In fact, just find wooden objects, wooden mice.
Yeah.
What do you think people's hesitation is to virtual worlds? They've been around for so long.
Yeah.
And I'm always surprised by how few people try them out even. And what do you think that is?
Well, I'm not a gamer. I don't know if you're a gamer.
No, I'm not.
Right. I find gaming really hard. And I suspect that's part of the reason, in that I managed to get into Second Life and I can totter around. What I really want to be able to do is get into Grand Theft Auto, because I don't know if you know, but there's a whole group of landscape photographers who spend all their time taking beautiful landscape photos inside Grand Theft Auto. Now, the landscapes are all based on California landscapes. And I'm a huge fan of California. I go every chance I get. And I really want to visit those landscapes. But because I'm such a useless gamer, I can't get out of the city. I get very, very frustrated. I can't even drive the cars properly. So I still haven't managed to get out of the city into these beautiful mountains. So I think that kind of illiteracy like mine really puts people off. It's so hard. It's hard to get there. And I mean, now we've got more VR. I've got a Google Cardboard, and I can do kind of very simple VR visits with my Google Cardboard. I really want to get into those mountains in Grand Theft Auto, and I just can't get there. It's hard.
I have to say it's a really, really good point, because some things are very simple, like going on Facebook, and these kind of things are simple. But actually, when you start to get, I mean, when I first visited Second Life, I was surprised by how confusing it was.
Yeah.
Just all of a sudden find yourself on a beach with random people, like also not being able to walk or navigate. And, you're trying to move limbs and talk and do things. And it was hard. It was very
Yeah.
intimidating, even that
Yeah.
first step.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
And in the 90s, I was part of the Moo community, which your older listener audience might remember, where it was like Second Life, but it was all in black and white text. There was no pictures, no sound, nothing,
Oh,
just
wow.
writing. And so it was perfect for writers, because wherever you want your environment to be, you just write it, and that's where you are. That suited me really well. But Second Life was too hard for me, really. So yeah, let's go back to the old days of no pictures and just some words.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I have total faith that these things will become easier and easier and easier over time. I mean, the gaming community, luckily for us, the gaming community is moving a lot of these technologies forward,
Yeah.
and it's just a matter of time before the interface becomes really simple. But when I listen to the VR podcast and I listen to what's happening, the technology is hard. It's intense technology. It's very sophisticated stuff that they're doing there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do feel quite illiterate in somewhere like GTA or Second Life. And I think that is the biggest barrier. So I'm sure there are cultural barriers, people just saying, oh, games are a waste of time. But if you actually sit down like I did and really try, you still find it really hard.
Right. Right. No, I agree. I had the same experience. It's just that the potential is so exciting. I mean, to be able to meet in a virtual world. I mean, I went to a conference with, I don't know if you know Agile Bill Krebs. He's also a virtual worlds guru. I should totally too. I will introduce you to. You'll love each other. But he took me to a conference in Second Life, and you immediately see the applications. He took me to a room where police were training with various demos. It was sort of their meeting room. And I immediately see like, oh my God, think of the things we could do if location is no longer an issue. Like, wow, wow.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I gather that the tourism industry is really heavily into this, because their tourism industry is producing a lot of VR tasters of, say, if they want to persuade you to go to the Alps, they will now produce a VR taster of what it's like to be in the Alps, and hopefully you'll buy a ticket.
Wow.
And even on cruise ships, on cruise ships, the inside cabins have no views, but on an increasing number of cruise ships, they now have a virtual balcony. And you can look at this balcony, you can see a live stream of the sea as it actually is going on outside, and hear it too.
Wow.
And see the curtains blowing in the breeze, but it's all virtual.
Wow. That really, when you see these things happen, you can't deny the power of the effect that it has, because if it didn't have any effect, there wouldn't be this much money and time being spent on the research. So clearly you've hit on something here.
Well, there's a lot of power in it. I think there's a lot of power in nature. And we're just finding ways in which to kind of harness it together with technology. And we have to get over our prejudice that the two are completely separate, because they're not. They're very intertwined.
Right. And stop feeling guilty and
stop feeling.
I really like that. I'm like, oh, that feels like I feel uplifted already. Like, oh
yeah. You can walk in a forest with your phone in your pocket. Nothing's bad will happen to you if you have your phone in your pocket.
Right. And what about unplugging completely for a short period of time? Do you feel that that's unnecessary? Like the total detox for a week or these kind of.
I'm quite skeptical about it, because I think that there's quite a lot of mythology around it. Personally, I prefer to stay connected all the time. Like everybody, I really hate the times when I want to be connected, but there's some problem, so I can't quite be connected. I think it would be easier to just say, right, turn off and stay away from the Wi-Fi. So that interim thing is really frustrating. But I just think there's a lot of sentimentalism about that. And my favourite story is that people always talk about Thoreau writing Walden and how that was the perfect experience, that he went to live in a hut by a pond for nearly a year, and he was learning how to live, in a disconnected way. But the truth is that Walden used to go shopping in town every week. He used to take his washing to be done. He used to go and read the newspapers. He was not disconnected. But you will often see that Thoreau, did I say Walden? Thoreau. You will often see Thoreau held up as being the perfect digital detox person. But he never was. He never was disconnected.
Right. So there you have it.
It's a fantasy. No more guilt.
Right. You're right. It is a fantasy. And and people should be choosing for themselves what it is that they need.
Yeah. And they can work out their own, what I would call a tech-nature balance. What suits you, what suits your family, and choose it for yourself and control it yourself. And don't be intimidated.
Indeed. Love it. So there's just a couple final questions. And one is, I see that you are also the co-founder of the Kids Nature Shop in Bournemouth. I wanted to know, just before we go, what is that? That sounds lovely.
Well, that's a little venture that I set up with my daughter. I've got 4 grandsons, all of varying ages, and one of my daughters has 2 of the grandsons. And we're very interested in trying to get together a shop that would enable people who wanted to buy nature-focused things for their kids to go and choose from the shop. So it's a very small shop, but the idea is that the spirit behind it is that we will select things that we think your kids would enjoy and that will connect them to nature.
Wow. Love the project. Lovely. How do you have time for all of this?
Well, I just like working online and doing things online. So this all suits me well.
Yeah, I can totally relate. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. I think that you've given people a lot of food for thought. And I know that I will be going out for a walk in the sunshine right after this interview because it feels like the right thing to do.
Keep your phone in your pocket.
And with my phone, indeed. Indeed. Well, thank you so much. And until next time, everybody, be powerful.